Hello there, you beautiful soul. Welcome back to another Culture Talk segment with your host and founder of Cultured Society. I am Rebecca Munoz, and I am here with another beautiful and special guest to vibe with me on a conversation about life philosophies, experiences, culture, and all things that are related to transitions that happen in our life. And as we all know, transition is very obvious, and it's something that is not easy to maneuver through, but it's the only constant in our life. Change is the only constant in our life. And it's so beautiful to be a person that can adapt well to change and transition as we maneuver through this human experience. And I am here to facilitate these conversations with these guests that are rolling through this platform to talk about the life experiences that have brought them to this very place that they stand in today. And if you have been with me through this journey, you will recognize that this platform brings in a variety of people, of humans just like you and I. And even though we look different on the exterior, I truly believe that we are all a part of one body in Christ. And you may not be a believer, but I do believe that we all have a very specific DNA code that we were brought to this earth to fulfill. But we have very similar components that bring up or that make up our human anatomy. We all have blood pumping through our veins. We have a pumping heart that allows us to feel, to express. We have a mind that is made up of billions of cells that allows us to creatively create, to think outside the box, really, and to be able to express ourselves in a way that is going to allow us to fulfill our divine purpose that we were brought to this planet Earth to fulfill. And so I love to have conversation with a variety of people. I've been known to walk up to complete strangers and make it as if we have known each other for an entire existence. And I truly believe that we have the ability to authentically connect like that because, again, we are all connected, whether it's energetically when we're conversing virtually or if it's face to face. And I truly believe that now is the time where we really need to tap into authentic connection, especially after 2020. Where we have been forced into isolation and quarantine, where we have lost a little bit of our social skills. And it's really important that we continue in this new time that we're living in to just recognize that, again, we are not separate from each other and that we have the ability to authentically connect and inspire each other to walk in our individual divine purpose. So today I am with my guest who is right now in Chicago, Illinois. His name is Baron Baller, also known as DJ SlotA. So Chicago-based music producer and DJ SlotA first fell in love with making beats back in his high school multimedia class in year 2000. Wanting to be around music as much as possible, he dual enrolled at the local community college studying music production. And when he wasn't in class, you could find him working at FYE, thumbing through albums for production and songwriting credits. Over the years, SlotA has evolved from being a producer into a DJ and is opened for the likes of Ghostface Killah, Tech Nine, Lunice, and has spun for the legendary Rakim. For his sounds infuse everything from hip hop, reggae, funk, to new disco and Latin rhythm into his sets. You can find SlotA lighting up dance floors in Chicago's vibrant neighborhoods such as Fulton Market, Wicker Park, River North, as well as a city near you. So with this, I introduce the amazing and talented SlotA to this platform. Thank you so much for joining me today, SlotA.
Absolutely, man. It's a pleasure, man. It's long overdue, and you're one of my favorite people, so I owe you a lot. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to dive deep into our life philosophies and the experiences of this amazing and talented DJ. I've had an opportunity to live life with SlotA back in my years in it's been a series of events that have brought me back to Chicago, and we've had the opportunity to interact face to face. And I've had an opportunity to see this talented DJ, do what he does best, as well as have amazing, deep conversations. So I'm really excited to be able to dive deep into his life philosophies and what makes him who he is. So if you have not had an opportunity to dive into this playlist, into the collective conversations, please take the time to do so. We have a variety of guests from Canada, Lithuania, Malaysia, all over the United States, different colors, genders, age groups. And again, even though we are very uniquely designed, we're all very similar, and we have an opportunity to learn so much from each other if we just open up the space to be able to share each other's stories. So with this, SlotA, I ask you the first question. What is your life's philosophy?
You know what, man? Had you asked me in my 20s, it was to discover. But right now, it's just more so about being flexible. There are a lot of things that happen or that you feel that you know when you're younger. What your 30s are gonna be like. There's a bunch of things that you've maybe read, but you haven't actually had through experience. And so as I've come to a point now, it's more so about like, you can be a teacher or be an example. That's where I'm at. I was introduced to the concept of Islam through a good friend of mine, Rashidi, when I was like maybe like 14, 15. And I kept meeting people who were really good examples that I didn't need to actually have I didn't have to be told about. I also had these conversations with Israelites. I also had these conversations with Jewish people. I've also had these conversations with Christians. And sometimes you find these really amazing examples that exist out in the world. And a lot of times you end up calling them things like heroes, idols, people that you look up to. And so there are other people who I met who are attempting to push whatever information onto others. And for some reason, it was super easy to ignore them. Mm-hmm. However, being the example of just like, yo, why is this energy different? And then going and having the conversation with them and going and having the dialogue. And so that's what I'm working on, right? I want to actually be able to teach, but I also want to be the example for somebody else out there. That's really where I'm at. Like the music, I love making music. I love the technology aspect. But one of the things that I keep thinking about, because we do only have a limited time here, if someone was to walk past you without conversation, would they ask you, stop you, the same way someone would with a Lamborghini, the same way someone would if you walked out of $1 million house? Yo, what's going on with you? What about you has brought you to this point in your life where you are this person? And so that's what I'm working on being, man. My father transitioned when I was 7 years old. So from pancreatic cancer. He was a sweetheart, but he also had issues, et cetera, like anyone else. But I knew when I was little, outside of chromosomes that we shared, I was chasing his ghost. Mm. You know what I mean? Like, I want to be as good as my father was. I want to be as my father was the center of his family. And then when my mother and him got married, he became the center of both families. Just from being a positive person, being responsible. And though those are things that I struggled with, now I'm at the point in my life where, okay, cool, I have to change up quite a few things because I know there's somebody out there looking at me that may be the example that they need. Mm.
Yeah. That's so good. That's so good. And, you know, it's so easy to speak, right? It's so easy to just try to teach people. But living the example, it takes a lot of discipline, and it really takes a lot of intention for you to be that person that is living what you're teaching. Now, you've already kind of answered this question about how that philosophy has evolved over the years, but you did mention that it changed a lot in your 20s. So, because I'm sure that at 7 years old, it's really difficult to understand transitions like the way that you experienced with your father. So from 7 to 20, and then from 20 to 30, how did that really shift for you?
So because there was so much dissonance between family members after my father's transitioning, there was a lot of trying to figure out who I am, and in the practice of that, like overcompensating. Um, around the time I met my wife, when I met my wife, I was in a very, 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 very vulnerable state. I had just been robbed. I just moved from the South Side to the North Side, and I had been a year celibate. I just got out of it. It was like it was a culmination of things coming back to back to back. And to be honest, it was very, very lonely. And when she became a part of my life, particularly because I'm not from Chicago, I'm from Michigan. I still had family there, both sides. My mother's there. That's home for me. In my 20s, it was more so about proving or figuring out who I am, but I was acting out. And sometimes, I mean, luckily it wasn't with drugs or anything like that. It was just overcompensating and being overly confident about things that I knew absolutely nothing about. I didn't know about love. I didn't know about there's different levels of love. There's love between parent and child. There's love between how you love your pet or your child. But the love between friendship, but there's like love between partner. And I literally spent the last 13 years of my life trying to be a good example, or I spent the first couple of years trying to be like my father and being like the thing that I thought in my head my father was. I spent a lot of time trying to break a mold of Michigan. And so, at least from my experience, it was, and I guess it's in majority of small cities. I grew up in Ypsilanti, Michigan. The path there wasn't art. The path there wasn't fashion. The path there wasn't a left brain affair. It was more of a cool. After 18, if you haven't figured this college thing out, you're going to go to the military. If you don't go to the military, you're going to work at Ford. You're going to retire in 30 years. And at the end of that, you're going to have kids. You're going to get a house. There's like this very cookie cutter experience. And I knew I wanted something different. But in the pursuit of getting something different, I didn't quite understand how to be myself in a place that I had to build myself up to be. In Michigan, where I grew up, I was something to someone. Here, I had to figure out how to matter and who to matter to in order to matter to a large group of people. And so you end up doing things that are like slightly outside of your comfort zone. You might lie. You might not necessarily be all the way forthright with what you think, because you're essentially trying to get in people's good graces. And so around my 20s, that kind of changed. It became less about trying to impress people versus, hey man, I'm really comfortable in my skin. I'm realizing I don't know much, and I need to silence a lot of my ego in order for me to do better and be better.
That's good. And it's so interesting because coming from a small town, and I can relate to that, to transitioning to a city like Chicago, that's even a process that you have to go through in order for you to be able to find yourself. Because being in Chicago, there's so much noise, there's so many people, there's so much of, everybody's trying to be something and do something, and to be able to find your own voice in a place like that can be very challenging, especially coming from a small town that is very boxed in and cookie cutter, right? So how would you say that from your upbringing to now, the circle of influence that you choose to have, how has that impacted the way that you think and live today?
You know what, man? It's great that you asked that. My circle of influence has changed quite a bit, and it's become fewer people. Um, and I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about God's jealousy. Not to believe in other deities, not to put another person at the same place that you put your creator. And for a while, I was turning successful people into deities. And so I was brushing elbows with quote unquote successful people. And instead of being myself, I was picking up I was misinterpreting what they were doing. And so I started to follow people, and I started to really root myself in certain friendships. A lot of musical relationships can be misleading because you're working in a common space, you have similar interests, you have all the things that you think make up a friendship or a partnership that if you remove music, the person goes away. And so I had to strip myself of, hey man, we do music together, we're friends, to if there was no music turned on, if my equipment was gone, will we still talk? And so that went from being 20 people to 10 people to 3. You know what I mean? And so, because at the end of the day, man, like we're all going into this human experience trying to be as humble as possible, some more than others, but like you end up finding out that you kind of put noise in the middle of your friendships. And so I had to turn a lot of that off. And so now my circle of influence has come from people I've struggled with, has come from people who I've struggled to remain friends with because they were pushing me. My wife has become a big part of that. And then even crazier, I was talking to a buddy of mine, a younger producer, about it took me a while to realize the impact that my female relationships had, and not relationships in terms of non-platonic relationships. I'm talking about real platonic relationships. That those influences changed my life. I remember I'll give 2 examples of that. I had a homegirl named Valerie. Valerie is beautiful as all outdoors. And because of the conversations that we had, the relationship that we had, I was willing to be vulnerable with her and express myself the same like ways I wouldn't be able to express myself with my male counterparts, either because of ego or just because you just don't say that thing to other guys. You know what I mean? And because of that, she was extra willing to put me on to new experiences, things that were maybe outside of my wheelhouse. You were another one. Um, I remember, man, it was like early 2000s. There was like actually it's kind of, yeah, it was early 2000s, like around 2005, 2006. Um, you helping me out fashion wise, being willing to have conversations with me about improving and other things of that night. Shoot, even when we came out, like we did a show out in Topeka, Kansas, and the promoter who was supposed to be holding us down for a night um bailed at the last minute. And you were willing to house me and my homie Neek. And we were, again, to the conversation, I was like, you know what? As much as, we say silly things in our youth, like bros before O's and all this other stuff, all my blessings have really come through women.
Mm.
It took me a while to realize my influence wasn't necessarily my brotherhood or my being my brother's keeper. It was being my sister's keeper, and kind of opening that whole thing up. Does that make sense? Hopefully that does. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you said that because, well, one, we are the sum of the five people that we spend the most time with. And within our teenage years and even in our 20s, when we're going through an identity evolution. And it's really important for all of us to go through that, to allow ourselves to not necessarily go wild and crazy, because I know I did, but it's really important for us to be able to test the waters as our creativity grows in order for us to put ourselves in situations that will teach us these valuable lessons that will make us more wise in the process as we become, more sovereign in our experiences as we get older. And it's a really important for us to recognize, especially in the male perspective, right? Because men are not taught from a very young age to be emotional. Although all of us have the feminine and masculine energy within us, in our society, we're taught to suppress that. We're not taught to express that. And men need women, women need men. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in a romantic level, right? I truly believe that, again, we are all the same. We just have a very different exterior, and we all can benefit from each other's growth and evolution if we give ourselves the opportunity to authentically connect, right? And men need that more than ever before. You need the ability to be able to emotionally connect to that feminine energy within you, and it changes the narrative of your relationships as a whole. And it really gives you the ability to fully connect, not only within yourself, but really understand the importance of emotional intelligence. Do you think that your emotional intelligence has changed as you allowed your narrative to change in your personal world?
Yes. And also I had the privilege of working at Apple, even if just in retail. And you're hired around people with some of the highest EQ there is while you're in that space. I've worked at Barney's, I've worked at Intermix, I've worked in warehouses, I've worked a bunch of different places. But when it comes to EQ and the questions that you ask yourself, right? Like before I started working at, like, it's kind of in their ethos. It's a question that they train you on, and something very simple, but a lot of us may not be able to do, is to say to another human being that you're presenting as an expert to be, right? Like, you come into the store, you thinking I know everything because I'm the face of whatever you envision the company to be, right? It's the same way people cuss like customer service reps. Like, dude, I am not at the top of the food chain. There's some things I don't know. Just to be simply able to say, I don't know, let's find out. And be comfortable in that, and know your resources. And maybe if you don't know your resources, ask, and you end up additionally get with additional resources. I think when I was able to lose my, what do you call that? When I was able to get out of my own way and be able to ask questions of others, when I was able to comfortably lean on others, I feel like I, in some way, became just a bit more emotionally intelligent. But particularly with women, and one of my most important women in my life, my wife, I had to learn so much. And it was a blessing, really, because as open as I was, as loving as I was, there were certain, I guess you could call them blockages that I still had to work through. And a lot of it dealt with emotional intelligence in terms of being perceptive, listening, and not listening with the thought of response right away. Being able to, all right, cool. This person is talking. I don't need to be thinking of an argument in order to win them over, because this isn't about being right. This is about like coming together to understand each other's viewpoints. So, and this emotional intelligence pays off in different ways. How you build, how you bond with others, how you repair what you have broken, if you've broken something, how you ask for, how, and it's to ask, how to ask for forgiveness, and also do the work through forgiveness to prove that you mean what you say. And so it's been to answer the question, yes. A lot of it has come through me having to, like, Chicago can be very harsh. Knowing how to turn that off to someone that you love, particularly if you've been programmed that way for X number of years, as a what do you call it? As a defense mechanism. Okay, cool. I can dial it back with you. I don't have to always argue a point. I can listen to you and acknowledge that I was wrong without having to win the argument. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, it's so true. And, you know, again, I had an opportunity to live in Chicago for many years, as well as places like LA, where it is very noisy and there's just so much, not only within the city, but also as a society as a whole, right? Telling you how to act, how to think, how to live, how to be. And it's really important for us to be able to tune into our inner voice, to be able to listen into what it is that our inner guidance is telling us to do. And it's difficult to do that in places like the city that you live in currently, to be able to have that emotional connection, to disconnect from all of the narratives that we are fed throughout our lifetime. And so you doing music and even like all of the other work that you've done in between time, because being an artist is definitely not easy to maneuver through. Do you noisy. Believe, yeah, exactly. Do you believe that the line of work that you do infects our society with positivity?
I think it has a face of positivity, but sometimes it can be quite, it depends on who's watching, right? Because like a lot of this is about comprehension and interpretation. I can be an example of something good. I can also be an example while doing good of something bad. My voice cracked. Crazy, Jesus. But it's up to you to interpret that. How you see it, what what context you come into the conversation with. For example, one of, I would say, my more positive examples was my friend Andre, aka Atu. Always been the smallest one out of us, but always was the leader. Always figured it out on the clock. I struggled with that early on. Just for like lack of confidence. And then when you found out that when we started having more conversations, more vulnerable conversations, we found out like, yo, he was scared too. How does faith play a role in that? Faith in yourself. Not faith in your maker, not faith in what the other person's going to do, but faith that if you make the ask, that you may receive. The faith that if there's pushback, you're not afraid to walk away from the table because you are enough already. Faith to, hey, does anyone know what's going on? You know what? I'll handle it. And also faith to, hey, you're really good at this. I'm going to trust you with blankety blank. I'm sorry, I lost the question just a little bit.
It's okay. Do you believe that the line of work that you do infects our society with positivity?
To some, yes. I feel like there's a misinterpretation of being in music. I believe everyone knows it to be, I'm going to be big, I'm going to be careless, I'm going to soil my royal oats, and this is my right to, because I am, and I am successful too. But like the thing that the thing that a lot of us don't acknowledge when we're younger is that because we're not professional yet, we end up prophesizing a lot. But we don't know that though. We're not aware of that. I'm a rapper. I'm going to be successful. I'm going to fight. I'm going to win. I'm going to have the baddest or the best. That's prophesizing. It sounds crazy to other people, but once you acquire it, you don't look so crazy anymore. So for me, I hope somebody looks at me and says, hey, I know somebody who really cares about the music that he plays in front of people. I hope somebody looks at me and says, hey, that person spent a lot of time learning their craft. And the fact that he spent so much time, it looks like it is very easy, and it is not. But I hope that someone also watches that and says, I can do that if I dedicate myself enough. So that's what I'm hoping I'm putting out there in the world. But somebody also might see like, yo, he's a DJ in a nightclub. He's probably out here wilding. And they might totally miss certain cues. I don't drink. I'm not out here trying to be promiscuous. Guess what? I'm married AF. I'm good. I just love what I do. And hopefully I can create a safe space for somebody else who feels the need to, hey, man, I don't want to wild out like that, but I do love this. That's what I'm hoping I'm doing. But everyone else may have their interpretations. I guess you kind of find that out after you personalize your experience. That's what I'm hoping I'm doing for somebody. Yeah.
Well, that's beautiful, because that's how you feel about your own craft and your own music, and you feel good when you do it. And that is the most important aspect of, because your perception creates your reality. You don't have control, or you're not responsible for anyone's perception of your reality. Absolutely. It's your responsibility to create the reality that you want to create in order for you to be able to fulfill your own personal purpose. And it's not going to look like everybody else's. And that's the thing that we, as a society, sometimes miss, because we're always trying to acquire the next best thing, or we have this perception of success that is not reality, and it's also not sustainable. And so, you know, it's really important for us to look at our own life and our own desires, our own crafts, and ask ourselves that question: how does it make me feel? And how am I putting that or projecting that into my own personal world for me to be able to create a positive experience for myself? Because again, that perception of your reality comes from you, and you don't have you're not responsible for the way that people respond to you unless you're doing something that's negative.
Sure.
And so it's really important for us to take responsibility for that, for what we do every single day and what we put out into this universe in order for us to get something positive back. And it may not be immediate. It may not be an immediate thing, but how do you believe that the work that you do every day is aligned with your purpose and higher calling?
I think kind of to go back to the being the example thing. I think my work allows me to create a platform to be a great example for somebody that may have not been introduced to me through anything other than music, either it be production, either it be DJing, either it be rapping, whatever it is. Gives you quite a nice platform and a very relatable and almost kind of like a cool, like, I'm pretty sure there's a kid out there who might be into music, who might listen to me before he listens to his principal, who might listen to me before he listens to his mother, particularly if you're in your teens. I think it gives me a platform to be inspirational to someone. And so, yeah, I only thing I can really do is just be the example of what I want to put out there. But I also have to understand that, like, I misinterpreted Dilla. I misinterpreted Dr. Dre. I misinterpreted Flying Lotus. All the people I'm naming are my influences to get me where I am. I misinterpreted DJ Cash Money, Jazzy Jeff, J Rock from the Beat Junkies. But the fact that I did also helped inform my decision making, also helped, you know what? DJ Scratch practices with hand weights when he DJs. So he's able to practice, like, DJ on with 45s, which are a smaller version of a record. But he can spin those. For those that don't know about 45s, this would be really quick. 45s are very sensitive. They're a smaller record. There's a hole in the middle. You have to put a 45 adapter in the middle in order for it to play on a record player or turntable like what's behind me. If you're doing it with a needle, the needle may skip. You have to have a very light, precise hand. I don't find that out if I don't see DJ Scratch. And I don't see how he practices. I don't learn that without hearing about Ninth Wonder's, I think it was 20 before Thursday, which means 20 beats before Thursday. Or if you want to go to a more popular reference, 5 beats a day, like 5 beats a day, the Kanye West, and then it ends up with Cree Summers. I think I forgot the bar itself, but once you find out, like, oh no, this takes time, this takes practice, this takes dedication, this takes sacrifice. I hope that someone looks at me and says that, like, yo, this is a journey. I have time. I'm going to give time. I'm going to sacrifice time. But it's a journey. I have a long time to enjoy this. But this is also going to come with focus. You're going to miss certain things. You're not going to be able to do everything that your friends do. Like, with responsibility comes great sacrifice. With responsibility comes great attention to detail, because it all falls on you.
Mm.
One of the lessons I recently learned after my mother was hospitalized, after my aunt passed away, and this is more of a 30s, maybe you won't catch this in your teens and 20s. There are people, you have time, but the people that love you may not have that time. So there's a balance that has to be made. As much as you focus on your craft, there may be a person that loves you dearly that you may give not as much time to, but gave you all the time in the world that they had because it was necessary for you to grow. With that, take the time, focus the time with them as well. If it's 20 minutes, focus. It's the same discipline that it takes to learn a craft. Love is a craft. Take that time, really focus. The excuses go out the window because the excuses come with taking someone for granted. The excuses come with, I think I have another day with. I started having friends get sick, family members pass. My Aunt Carmen passed away. Not Aunt Carmen, sorry. My Aunt Ouija passed away. And that was someone who loved me dearly. And when she transitioned, it hurt. Not because she transitioned in pain. It hurt because the questions that I could have asked her, that, oh man, she'll be around. I can make the phone call later. And you'd be surprised how much that time and focus makes another person's day brighter. Because honestly, as people get older, and this is conversations I've had with my mom and my aunts, as people get older, man, we kind of cast them away. We don't take them as serious. We don't necessarily, but we also forget that, like, yo, in most, if indigenous villages, like, those are the people who everyone goes to. I know that we live in a society where that isn't necessarily the case. Oh, mom, you don't know how to work the phone. No, it's, hey, man, the same way that you didn't necessarily know how to say you needed to use the bathroom is the same attention to detail, attention to love, attention to loving that you must pay to another person.
Isn't it interesting that that perspective or that perception of life changes or evolves as you grow into your craft, or even grow into the identity that you originally were brought into this earth to be or to fulfill, right? Because I'm sure that you didn't feel that way about life in your 20s when you were just maneuvering aimlessly, just trying to make music.
For sure. I mean, dude, we took so many risks. I was so there was a gap in terms of music releasing, right? There's a lot of people who maybe released music in 2012 that maybe have stopped, and maybe they still make music, but like maybe it's still on a hard drive, right? And in my 20s, I was so willing to investigate. I was so willing to take a risk. You know what, man? I'm just going to go. I'll figure it out when I get there. In our 30s, it kind of becomes a little bit more of a comfort thing. All right, well, is there, I mean, what are the accommodations? Is there a certain budget? I don't want to lose out on this in order to do this. And all to protect the comfort that could eventually kill you later, or hurt you later, or break your heart later. And that's the thing that we don't quite understand about our 20s. 20s, we may not necessarily know it's faith, but we're acting on faith. We're hoping that the person that says they do XYZ does it and isn't lying, isn't manipulative, isn't malevolent, is actually going to come through. And what ends up happening is a lot of times you end up bumping your head. In your 30s, that sounds very unattractive. But those same opportunities pay tenfold what your comfort does, even if you take a loss. It took me a while to get that. So to find the balance of, hey, I'm used to a certain level of comfort, but I know the risk, the reward for the risk that I'm going to take may pay dividends compared to the level of comfort and consistency that I have. Mm-hmm. We kind of lose our I would say so much that in your 30s is as much as it's just natural. Your thing is safety, protection, and consistency. Me and a homegirl of mine were talking about this last night. 3/4 of her staff at a restaurant have COVID. Instead of just saying, you know what, man, we just need to shut down for a little bit because it could potentially affect our bottom line later. Man, you know, we just got to keep pushing through. Instead of taking the risk to protect everyone for a short amount of time and taking a loss and fighting through that loss, the comfort is in continuing something that isn't working well out of the fear that this small time that it's not working well, we could lose this whole thing. How do you balance that? How do you continue to fight? How do you do the right thing? When we're younger, we watch action movies, we watch love stories. For some reason, the right thing seems so easy and it seems very black and white. But as you get older, you find out that, like, no, these are all different gradients of color. The black and white is on the far reaches, but there's a whole lot of gray in the middle, and I have to figure this out on the clock. You know,
and it's a very hard decision to make oftentimes when you're under that pressure and you have such a big responsibility, like for instance, a restaurant, or even where you have a big event and you are going to work this event and it's the only thing that is going to bring you that source of income for the entire month. But oftentimes you don't realize that that short-term sacrifice that you have to make to stretch yourself can potentially actually catapult you that much further over time versus you just pushing through it and doing it anyway, right? And it's like not something that people are willing to see oftentimes when it comes to their craft and their purpose. You know, it's really uncomfortable to make sacrifices. It's really uncomfortable to even go through periods of time where maybe you're not making any money, but you believe in this so much that if you continue to push through the self-doubt, the fears, the stressors, the anxiety, and you stick to what it is that you truly believe is the right thing to do, the reward is so much greater in the end. It's just that not a lot of people are willing to make that sacrifice to actually push through it. Oftentimes you just give up and you say it's the end of it, right?
Question for you. Do you have plants at all?
Plants? Yeah.
One of the things I learned with plants, and it kind of works in this same world, is that like we're all living off resource, right? But if you have dead limbs on a plant, it is best to remove them so the rest of the plant can live. That's the sacrifice. And a lot of times it's hard for people to do because they don't necessarily know, well, this is dead. I could be potentially killing the rest of the plant. It's the faith of and the knowledge of, hey, if I remove some of these dead limbs, now this plant can properly eat, get whatever resource and energy, because the energy isn't going to preserving dead limbs, things that are going to fall off. And it's just like parallels in nature. I think sometimes we attempt to outsmart nature, and nature is like, nah, fam, I'm here for a reason. I am the teacher. You might want to come back to me. We attempt to outthink it with a multitude of excuses. But sometimes you can't get away from that. Your nature or your character, which I find to be, if you look up the etymology of character, it means etching. What is etched into you? And if you think of etching, that is a carving into in order to make. Now, if this was clay, which I believe it is actually, the etching in this, unless I go and etch more, unless I impress more, this remains the same. Or I potentially break it. Sometimes you have to step up and impress new things into yourself. You have to step up, and sometimes you have to impress new things into others so everyone else can flourish. But it's all kind of there in nature. Like, get a pet, get a nephew, or a niece, go watch them. You'll find that the things that you're scared of and the things that you think of are the first thing that they go to. Every time. The quickest way to feed a dog a pill is to attempt to make it a game. I can't put it in a treat, but I can act like I don't want you to have it. And the dog will respond the same way as if it was a treat that you were supposed to feed it. It's funny how nature works like that. Yeah. You can't run away from these things. You can't outsmart these things. This is just nature. And so sometimes it's best to kind of let the process be the process. Like even the story of the prodigal son, father, two sons, one son goes away, wiles out, sends a letter back after losing the last dollar of his inheritance, wants to come back home. Younger son says, yo, you gonna let him back home? Like, what are you talking about? Dad says, yo, you'll understand later. Son comes back home in the story. If you look at it for a very literal thing, and I actually got this, I think it was Guy Ritchie talking about this on the Joe Rogan podcast when I was listening to Joe Rogan. And one of the things, if you follow the story very literally, you're just only going to think it's a story of three sons. It's literally the story of one person. You can go away all you want to, but you eventually come back. It's just nature. You always come home. No matter where you go, no matter where you spend your time, no matter what lies you told yourself, you always come home.
So interesting that you brought up the story of the prodigal son, and not a lot of people do, because it's right before this interview, me and my mom were talking about that very thing, because I lived the story of the prodigal son. And it's really important, really, like through this human experience, to allow yourself to go through these phases and to go away and to experiment and experience, because that's really the only way that you find yourself, and really how true awakening happens, because you recognize that what's out in the world is it's all make believe, right? Like you have to experience it for yourself in order to really come up with the sovereignty or the sovereign experiences, to know that you can really make up your own reality, and your perception of that reality is what's going to allow you to live out your purpose every single day. And I mean, you've always, for myself and my perception of you, you've always been very unique and true to who you are as a person, even through the different stages of your life. But how would you say that you stay relevant, unique, and true to who you are as a person, especially during this time that we're living in today?
I found out about the two intelligences that exist. One is the intelligence of people, or people in mass. And then there's an intelligence that you acquire when you're in solitary or in solitude. The pandemic kind of put that on blast for me because the only person I was seeing was my wife and or my music equipment. And at a certain period, like at a certain time, I kind of taken on things that didn't necessarily fit me, didn't fulfill me. It was what do you call it? It was a really nice purification period. The same thing that, like, you know, people get gold and they remove the exterior rock and they're able to actually get pure gold out of the center. There's a certain amount of heat. There's a certain amount of force and friction that comes along with that. And how I've been able to do it, right? Because, mind you, my home is my mother. My home is my wife. I had to learn how I really felt about things, not in a group setting. I had to learn that maybe I wasn't the most honest with myself about certain events that happened. So it took me a little while to slow down and kind of process a lot and really figure that out. And so right now, to answer that question, the way I've been able to figure that out has been through just, hey man, take some time, breathe, and realize you only know so much. You only have so much time. You are a product of the systems that you create in your life, the habits that you form, the clarity that you can get after taking time away from the noise. How do you get to the signal? And so that's where I'm at now. How when I speak, I'm myself and myself only. Even though we have examples in our lives and we're a product of our thoughts and things of that nature. How do you control your diet? Is your diet just food? Is it information? Is it the things that you look at, read? Because they all affect you. Now, food may, help you get pancreatitis, but another sickness is one of the mental. How is the information that you're processing on a daily basis helping you nourish yourself in a way that's productive? And also when things go left, what are you doing to comfort yourself in those times? Because we all have heartbreak. We all take losses. We all have large waves of change that happen. How do you, when everything is quiet, there's no one else around, there's no books, there's no phone, there's no TV, there's no laptop. When all the entertainment is gone, can you deal with you? And that's why I'm learning how to deal now. Is you messed up earlier. When it's quiet time, do you go back and go over that argument that you had with your spouse? Do you keep reliving that argument? Can you let it go? One of the biggest blessings that came into my life was meditation. The thing that it taught me was not one just letting go and a bunch of breathing exercises. It taught me forgiveness, like real self-forgiveness. The concept, a lot of times, it sounds far out, particularly if you have Like if you've ever tried to tell someone who's having an anxiety attack to, hey man, we should meditate, it's probably the wrong time. But one of the things that is definitely brought to the front of my mind, and a lot of times, is that like if you're doing a guided meditation, you can find these on YouTube, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 5 minutes, right? In there, normally what is said if you're listening to a guided meditation is, hey, I know we're doing this breathing thing. I know we're giving you all the rums that you want, but there's something tickling your nose. It's okay to acknowledge that. Acknowledge it. Sit in that, acknowledge it, do whatever you need to do, but get back to this. That's hard for a lot of people to do. It sounds like a far off concept. But even if you listen to people who meditate daily, it's, yo, I'm still trying to control this monkey called a brain. These wild thoughts, these thoughts that are ever expansive. I'm sitting here quietly. Hey, is that my dog? Dude, the guy upstairs is really loud right now. I wonder if I left the curling iron on. It's the same thing that we all go through. But it's really, all right, cool. I've acknowledged it. Unless I'm going to go do something about it, I should probably get back to this breathing. 10 minutes later, you can go back to real life. Meditation has been a great, great, great teacher for that very thing.
You just answered my next question. What practices do you implement in your daily life to stay grounded and divinely connected to source? So I'm glad that you said meditation. And I'm also glad that you talked about the importance of just recognizing your breath, but also recognizing the inner dialogue that we have like second by second, because we're literally, I mean, thousands of thoughts are coming through as information like every second of the day. And it really is just about tuning into not only your breath so that you can allow to stay focused, but also to focus in on what's happening within your body. Because once you recognize what's happening within your body, you have the ability to change that narrative quickly.
Sure.
So what else do you do?
You know what, man? When it's warm, one of my favorite places to go to here is Lake Michigan. I'll drive to Montrose Beach, which is just, let me not say that. I live on the north side of Chicago. It is not that far away from me. And I would just go literally sit on the edge for hours and just kind of either practice meditation or have a conversation with myself. And it looks crazy as hell to anybody else. But because these thoughts are mine, because these thoughts are things that I'm dealing with, either if it's to deal with another human being or to deal with an ailment, or just a setback. Sometimes it's good to have those conversations, because you'd be surprised of the inner dialogue that you can have with yourself to repair, to refine, and also just to like, hey man, like I ended up finding this out a little bit later in life, that like your mind doesn't get sarcasm. Your mind doesn't get like self-deprecating humor. When you say shit, it means it takes it very literally. Ah, man, if I wasn't so blah, blah, blah. If I wasn't so blah, blah, blah. Man, I got jowls now. It doesn't know that you're joking. So be careful what you tell yourself. That's a part of the diet. Be careful, because these are inner dialogues. Regardless if you're joking with somebody else, because all these jokes come from truth, right?
Absolutely.
But a lot of people don't understand what funny is. Sometimes humor is a point of view. Sometimes humor to somebody is really ironic. You ever had somebody tell you like, oh man, isn't that funny? And they don't mean humorous. They mean out of place, ironic. Isn't that different with contradictory from what's going on? They don't mean humor a lot of times. These words mean something, but they may not necessarily mean that we've all come to understand. And your inner dialogue is possibly the most important dialogue that you have, because it is the voice that you hear before you pick up the phone, before you have a conversation with anybody else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's so good. And I'm so glad that you said that, because you know, there's this saying that you can eat all the kale you want, drink all the water, you can go to the gym, you could do all these things to change your physical body. But until you address the condition of your heart and of your mind, you're still going to be unhealthy. And oftentimes the dis-ease that happens within our body is directly correlated with what is going on in the conditions of our heart. And it's really important for us to recognize the relationship that we have with ourselves when it comes to the way that we speak to ourselves. The conversations that we have will definitely impact the day-to-day actions that we take to nourish our physical body. And it's so important that we develop those practices that are going to be sustainable, and that you tune in to your body, you tune into what it is that your body is asking you to do in order for you to heal yourself, because nobody's going to do that for you. You can go to all the doctors, psychologists, therapists, psychiatrists, counselors, but nobody's going to do that work for you until you tap into your own intuitive abilities to heal and do it on a day-to-day basis, right?
Absolutely. Even if you get on an airplane, one of the warnings that they tell you when a mask drop in case of a crash is that apply the mask to yourself and then help a child. If you can't take care of you, how are you going to take care of someone else? And it kind of goes back to the nature of things. There are a lot of lessons that like we may not necessarily listen to because we view them as like instruction. We view it as authority, but they're kind of there. How you deal, like once I found out what culture was, that changed the way I moved with people. Culture is outside of art, outside of whatever constructs and what do you call them? Mindsets or whatever the case may be, or skill sets. That's what I was trying to get to. Whatever skill sets you're talking about. Culture is the collective group thinking. The rules that we put amongst each other. The reason why there's a no littering. The reason why, like, if you look at a no littering sign, you may feel that it, no littering. What are they talking about? These people are bougie. No, we're letting you know that we care. But that comes to interpretation. That comes down to how you feel, what inner dialogue you're having with yourself when you see that sign. If you look at that sign and you feel oppressed by that sign, that's time to have a conversation with you about that particular thing. If they say something about a crosswalk or that the speed limit goes down, it isn't because we want you to slow down and give you tickets. This is an intersection here. People are going to walk and cross. There are children here. They don't know how to protect themselves yet. So we need you to slow down so they can potentially do that. So they can see it in slow time. You teach children things slowly and over time with repetition. As you get older, you want perfect repetition. So you can learn at 45 miles an hour. This child needs it at 25. He's going to continue to see cars for the remainder of his life, or her life, or their life. these are the things that like you kind of have to start. There's a literal message and then there's a message under it. Be empathetic enough and selfless enough to be able to look at something and know that it's not against you. It just may be for someone else.
Oh, that's good. That's good. And it kind of ties into even interactions that we have with others, right? When maybe somebody does something and it triggers an emotion that can be good or bad. And if it's a bad emotion or a bad trigger, it's not necessarily that that person is doing something to you. It's something that you have to work in within yourself in order for you to shift your perception about what's happening. And it's so interesting how we are constantly triggered with those interactions, with the signs that we see, with the conversations that we have, with really everything is mirroring back to you. Isn't that so interesting?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it just takes a little bit of time to learn that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what words, I mean, you have literally showered us with words of wisdom, that you have learned and gained through your experiences. But finishing this out, what words of wisdom would you give to those seeking a deeper understanding of themselves?
Um, You're not going to understand it until it happens. In order for you to get through it, you must go through it. And all right, so like when I worked at Apple, there was a really cool Unitarian pastor that came through. I asked him what Unitarian was and a bunch of things. Instead of it being the God Holy Spirit being separate, we all believe that they are one. Blah 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 blah. But we get into a part of this conversation where we were talking about funerals, and one of the things he said was in our church, in our particular church, and I kind of took this one with me, was if you don't feel it, if you don't go through the emotions of it, you can never get past it, either partially or completely. So let's just focus on the concept of said funeral. Someone is transitioned. Not only do you have to deal with the finances around this person passing, the business of this person passing, but now you also have to make aesthetic decisions, right? All right, well, what's the plot gonna look like? How big is the plot? What's the casket gonna look like? Do we cremate? And then after that, you have to deal with the emotional portion. Now, a lot of like, even though these are segmented, you're kind of dealing with them all at one time. But you also may have to go to work. You also still have to take care of your responsibilities. You have a bunch of things, but during this moment between the visitation, the actual funeral, the burial, and the repast, even if you just go through it there, I go through the acknowledgement that this person is no longer with us. I go through the acknowledgement that I am hurt. And not only do I do that, I go through it. I let this all go. I'll be transparent. I'm not a crier. In order for me to cry, I've hit DEFCON 4. I've hit the highest emergency. I didn't know until I watched the kids movie. I can't remember the name of it. They went through all these different emotions. The different emotions were characters inside of a kid's brain. And for some reason, after they did everything else, after they were angry, after they were spiteful, the person who they didn't want to go to, which was crying, was the reset button. A lot of times that's really hard for guys. We're taught not to. Matter of fact, if you kind of grew up in like I don't want to call it a minority house, maybe just a house that was very strict and was really stuck on survival. You may have been told this, and you might have heard it in different households. If you cry, I'm gonna give you something to cry about while the person's crying. So you learn, okay, that's not the response that I want to give. But that crying is the reset button for you. It's the acknowledgement of, hey, this happened. I feel this way about it. I may never have blah, 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 blah about this. And it allows you to become comfortable again and acknowledge again and go through again the very thing that affected you. So if you've been through heartbreak of many types, cry. Hit your reset button. Grieve. Grieve in silence. But be okay with it. This is all in part, not only to help you, but it's also there for you to be able to help another person, because we're all on the same plane together. And when things arise, the air masks come down, you must apply it on yourself first so you can help another person later.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful. And it's so true. And it's so important for us, especially during this time that we're living in, to be able to tune in to what it is that we're feeling and allow ourselves to go through the process of grieving, of feeling, and not allowing ourselves to sedate through the process with all the external factors that oftentimes leave us numb, and they end up accentuating or even making us relive those pains later on, or they extend the process instead of us allowing ourselves to feel the very thing that we need to for a short period of time, process through those emotions and recognize that it's a part of our human evolution, and that through our human experience, we're going to go through transitions, we're going to go through pains, we're going to go through losses, we're going to go through gains, we're going to go through so many different experiences that are all only really meant to expand us and to really transform our perspective, to allow us to see things from a higher perspective, from a higher vantage point, so then we can then help others in return. And at the end of the day, that's all we're here to do. We are all world servers. We are all light workers. We are all the way seers, right? We're all here to shine a light on this duality filled world that is filled with light and darkness. And oftentimes those two coincide. And it really gives us the opportunity to kind of close the gaps on those dark moments, because all they are is moments. If we are suffering, it's because we're either living in the past, the memory of the past, or we're living in tomorrow that it hasn't even been created yet. The only moment that we have is what's happening right now in this very moment. And sometimes it's so difficult to see that when we have all these external noises from the media and from social media, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and we're seeing, all these highlight reels of people's lives, but we really don't take the time to see what's really happening, or even just take the time to recognize that it doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. What's happening right here? What's happening in your heart space? What's happening right here? Where is this dis-ease or these anxious feelings coming from? Because again, they're all valid, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't go through these things, right? Because everybody's experiencing some type of pain or some type of trauma. All of us have experienced these experiences that have been truly painful and transformational. But if you see those experiences as just that, as an opportunity for you to look at it from a higher perspective and to recognize that your pain often turns into your greater purpose, and that you have the ability to really help people shift their narrative. It really changes the way that you see the world and the way that you live your days throughout this human experience that we're having here today. So I really encourage you to just tune into your inner voice and to recognize that your experience isn't irrelevant and that you matter, and that no matter what it is that you're going through today, it's going to allow you to perceive tomorrow in with a greater vantage point. So I thank you so much, Baron, for joining me today. Do you have any finishing statements that you'd like to add?
No, man. Thank you for allowing me to have this conversation with you. And again, to anyone who's, I guess, gonna follow me from this, these are all recent adjustments. I said some crazy, stupid shit in the past, so forgive me. I'm still growing.
We're all growing,
Absolutely.
and we're all growing, and we're all evolving, and we're all transforming, and we are stepping into a new earth and a new way of thinking and living. And I invite you to open up your mind, to open up your heart, to open up your perspective, to see things from a higher vantage point, because then you will recognize that the heaven that is talked about in biblical terms is actually a concept that we have the ability to live in this very moment. Your perception creates your reality, and your perception has the ability to create heaven on earth. At least that's where I choose and desire to live every single day, regardless of what may be happening around me, all the chaos, the war, the spiritual war zones. Again, we have the ability to change our perception and to recognize that we can shut it off and just live in a much greater space, or a much kinder space in our mind. Thank you so much for joining us today. And until next time, peace and blessings.